Request Mr. Varun Badhwar, CISSP founder and CEO of RedLock, to kindly come onto the stage. Put your hands together for our next speaker. Let's welcome Mr. Varun Badhwar onto the stage. A very, very warm welcome to you, Varun.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here in India. I'm visiting from Silicon Valley, where RedLock is headquartered. I'm here representing our exclusive partner in India, the Achilles, and hopefully talking about a very interesting and top of mind subject for a lot of you today, which is around public cloud and what do I do as I'm moving workloads into public cloud? What are the challenges? What are the new threat vectors? What existing tools and investments will continue to work? What are going to be my net new problems and challenges that I have to think about? Just maybe by the show of hands, how many of your organizations are thinking about migrating into AWS or Azure or other public cloud environments? Okay, reasonable. I think what I've observed in the last few days of being here is obviously we've seen a huge uptick in North America, Europe, in terms of public cloud at large enterprises. In fact, companies, even as internet scale companies like Salesforce and Workday, are no longer interested in building their own data centers. They're migrating to public cloud for the obvious benefits of speed, agility, time to market. But I think as security practitioners, what we're finding is that the security breaches, data breaches in the cloud are growing exponentially. In fact, just in the last few months, Accenture, Deloitte, Verizon, Dow Jones, Scottrade, I can't even keep up with how many organizations have been in the news because of security failures in the public cloud. And so I wanted to talk about sort of why is that happening, right? A lot of us think, hey, we're moving to the cloud, Amazon's going to take care of us, Azure, Microsoft's going to take care for security controls. But unfortunately, it's a shared responsibility. And so to take some examples of recent findings and security breaches that were public, the United States, we lost 99% of all voter personal information because of one checkbox gone wrong in AWS S3 cloud storage. There was another incident which was one login, which was a very large security identity in the cloud company that got breached because one of their users accidentally leaked the access credentials to their AWS production environment with their source code. An attacker got access to that, accessed the environment. It's not behind a firewall, so if somebody has credentials, they can go into it. They laterally moved across the network and exfiltrated data, and nobody came to know. Another example is that recent findings have shown that about almost 80% of MongoDB instances, database instances in the public cloud, are misconfigured and internet exposed. But people aren't silly, people aren't stupid. Why is this happening, right? And at the end of the day, I think what we're finding is that, and Gartner says this as well, that 95% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. Actually, for none of these was it Amazon or Azure or Google at fault. It was really the customer who owned the configuration responsibility, made a mistake, had no controls in place to detect it, and that became an issue that was public. So, this is an important topic, which is organizations like yours are responsible for security in the cloud. There's a difference between security off the cloud and in the cloud, right? So let's understand that. The security off the cloud is where cloud providers like AWS clearly publish a shared responsibility model where they say anything L1, L2, L3 will take care of, right? Routers, switches, physical infrastructure. But at the end of the day, they cannot control what you're hosting in these environments, right? So from a standpoint of configurations of these services, right? You log into console.aws.com, you configure some services, you start some new EC2 instances. That's your responsibility. You're configuring these environments for your needs. There's the user activity aspects of it, right? You can't connect AD into your AWS and Azure environments. Chances are the reason you've moved into these environments is because your development teams, your business units want to go be agile, be autonomous, deliver things faster, and which way they've circumvented a lot of your security controls. The third element of that stack is network traffic. Right? In a traditional world, you used a Cisco, Juniper type of box, you put a proxy in front of your data center, and you had good control. In the cloud world, you don't get a tap or a span port. Where are you going to plug in your traditional network architectures? It's not going to work, right? And then you've obviously got responsibility for hosts and applications. And I think what's the newest here in the stack. Everybody understands network security. You just have to treat it differently. The architectures are different. Everybody here understands securing your users, your access. But that resource configuration is really important. A lot of these cloud services are actually PaaS services, right? Platform as a service. You configure through the APIs certain access. If you have a cloud storage bucket, you check one box, and now it's public to the whole world. Configuring firewall rules, right? There's security groups, there's ACLs on the host itself, there's the assignment of IP addresses. There's just so many nuances, so many checks and buttons and toggles that you can press. One of them gone wrong, can get you in trouble. And so I think that's what we want to talk about, right? How do you take care of that stack above, which is your responsibility, and sort of what are the types of problems within those environments that you need to be mindful of? And so, double clicking on those stacks, if you think about it from a resource configuration standpoint, you're responsible for compliance at the end of the day, right? Your auditors are going to come ask you for, can you prove to me you're PCI compliant? You meet the NIST requirements. Whatever the frameworks are that your organizations have been aligned towards, you've got to now map those controls into public cloud. How do you do that? That's a complex problem. How do you determine which of your policies, how do you map procedural controls into technical controls in public cloud? And that's going to be different for Microsoft Azure. It's going to be different for AWS. Okay? Beyond that, how do you manage security groups, firewall rules, right? Your developers are actively making changes. I can't tell you how many times we talk to the security organizations. They really have very limited understanding of what the developers are pushing into these environments and how they're configured. So this part of managing resource configurations is really foundational to the cloud. If you're in the cloud right now and you don't have these basic checks, that's a highly, highly risky proposition to your organizations. That is why organizations like Accenture and Deloitte and others have been in the news lately. Okay? But that's not enough. That's not it. Right? As you look up the stack, I talked about the one login breach scenario. You're not only looking at compliance standards, but you have to look at actual activities in the cloud. What are my users doing? Because cloud services are all API driven, you're going to have lots of API keys interacting with different services on-premise, your on-prem data center, third-party services. They all have access tokens to your cloud. How do you know if one of those access tokens is compromised? If I steal your access token, I log in from San Francisco using that token, and I exfiltrate your data, would you be able to detect that in public cloud? That's a question you have to answer. That's more of the external attack vector. There's the problem of internal privileged insiders as well. One of the biggest challenges you're going to face is we all understand least privilege principle for access. Good luck trying to deploy that in public cloud. It's almost impossible. Why? AWS itself has 70 plus different services. Azure has dozens of services. When you're provisioning, it's very hard to know what your developers are going to need access to. So most times people are going to have star.star permissions. Now with those permission sets, how do you detect if they're actually taking the right actions, the right things per their job responsibilities? Continuing to move about that stack. What if a developer comes into work, he's told that he needs to spin up a new database to process some information, and that database is accidentally assigned a firewall rule that allows it to talk to the internet. I talked about the MongoDB scenario. 78% of MongoDB databases in public cloud are internet exposed. Do you think that was by, intentionally done? Likely not. You don't expose databases publicly. But why did it happen? Cloud is complex. Firewall management is complex. Your traditional firewall management products don't work in the cloud. But right now, chances are you're probably not using anything to monitor those. If a developer does push a database to the public cloud, chances are you won't know today. But that's important. That's fundamental. If you think about everything I'm talking here, it's not rocket science. It's things you have thought about in your data centers. However, as you move to public cloud, none of your existing solutions will work. And so you've got to think of these problems differently. One of the most unique problems in the network traffic layer is the fact that IP addresses are elastic in the cloud. Our research has found that an average instance, a cloud virtual machine, exists for only 2 hours and 7 minutes. Imagine that. You're coming from a traditional data center where once you've assigned an instance, it's got a static IP address. You know that that instance is a database. You know it. In the modern world, when I got into this building, On a particular IP address, it could have been a web server running. On that same IP address by now, it could be a database or a mail server running. How would you know? You think just looking at network data based on IPs is going to help you? No. Right? And so those are the kind of complexities that you have to think about as you move to public cloud. Vulnerability management. We've all solved for this before. We know how to do this in our sleep. Right? You run a weekly report. You know exactly what patches are missing on what IP addresses, and then you go fix them. Well, now it becomes interesting. When the scan was run on a Friday night or a Saturday night, you got a report telling you that IP was missing 5 patches. You come into work on a Tuesday or Wednesday when you're ready to actually take action on that, that instance is gone. So what was the instance that was actually missing the patch? Was that instance a database? Was it a web server? You never know. Now, good news is all of this is solvable. You just have to take a different approach to this. Right? And so I want to walk you through what we are seeing with organizations moving to the cloud in terms of thought process, in terms of priorities, in a maturity model. In a lot of conversations I've had this morning with some of you here, a lot of you are in what I'd consider stage 0 or stage 1 of cloud maturity, which means you're exploring, you have dev test workloads running in the cloud, you're thinking about the controls you're going to require, but that's really where your focus is at the moment. But don't forget that you're going to have to ultimately scale to thousands of workloads in the cloud. And the problem statement will shift as you get more scale. So let's look at the problem statement when you're initially getting on board. The first problem in stage 0 is going to be cloud migration planning. Can I take my existing policies and architecture requirements and map them to the cloud? Right? So we'll get through that. The next stage will be compliance. Can I at least tell my auditors that I'm doing what I said I'm supposed to do? You'll get through that as well. It becomes harder and harder as you start scaling because the problem statement becomes broader, right? In stage 2, when you have hundreds of production workloads, as a security organization, you're going to want capabilities to even just go and ask a question. Hey, where do I have databases running in the public cloud? Today, you don't have a way to do that. You're going to have to ask your developers where that is. Because this whole CMDB concept, configuration management databases that we've all invested in the past, those don't work in the cloud. The cloud is too dynamic. But those are still problems you have to solve. You have to do threat detection. You have to do vulnerability management, the things I talked about in the last slide. And then eventually, when you're actually at scale, thousands of workloads, you want to auto-remediate. If you're familiar with this term DevSecOps, everybody's moving to DevOps, right? You have continuous integration, continuous deployment. Why don't we have continuous security, right? You need that. Self-healing architectures are the only way you're going to be able to deploy security controls in the cloud. You cannot do manual security reviews. You cannot do pen tests. Those things are all point in time. In the cloud, that doesn't work. Right? And so these are the types of capabilities that RedLock helps you with, and certainly happy to have a conversation in the Achilles booth around sort of what those are and why that's important. But I often get this question, but architecturally, Varun, you're saying there's differences, right? Existing architectures don't work. How do you do it in the cloud? And so I wanted to sort of give you just a snapshot of how we're approaching this problem in the cloud to give you some food for thought. And so we're doing this all through APIs. There's no agents, there's no proxies. Everything is done within minutes. It's deployed within minutes. And the main focus for us is we're going to pull through the dozens of different APIs that the cloud providers provide for network traffic, for configuration, for host information, for user activity. These are all disparate pieces of information in the public cloud. We bring it all together. We correlate all of that information, and we provide you, the first thing we're doing is doing a discovery of your assets. We can tell you what resources are running in which cloud environment, how are they configured, how do they map against your policy requirements. And while doing that, we'll also make your existing security investments relevant. Maybe you're using a Qualys scanner for vulnerability management. We'll pull those feeds in as well. So this is the missing configuration management database that you don't have for public cloud that we built for you first. Because our synthesis is unless you have that, you don't have good controls behind that. Then we'll do a correlation. This is where we use a lot of AI to piece information together. Can we go build models for your environment? Can we tell you if you're running 5,000 EC2 instances, which ones are databases versus which ones are mail servers? Because if you cannot understand that, you cannot do policy enforcement. And at the very last stage, what we do is we ship with out-of-the-box policies for various compliance frameworks and standards that you can piece that together. Right? So that's our approach. It's all sort of out-of-band, frictionless, cloud-first architectures. And of course, we understand you're going to be using some single pane of glass in your enterprise, whether it's a Splunk or a QRadar, and so you can feed a lot of the insights from the platform into your environment. I'll just end by saying there's typically 3 main drivers for customers that are thinking about RedLock, right? So risk management is one element, which is I've got to make sure I can quantify the risk back to my management, to my board, that if we're using the public cloud, here's what our exposures are, here's how we're containing that, and sort of how do we just do core risk management. The second is architecture validation. As you're moving on-prem workloads to the cloud, can you demonstrate compliance? Can you demonstrate that you still have the same controls you had on-premise in public cloud, and you're not just relying on the cloud providers to do that for you? And the last piece, as I mentioned in the maturity model, is SOC enablement. You all probably, the larger organizations have massive security operations centers. These teams need to be able to investigate incidents, perform cloud forensics. As I mentioned, if instances come and go every 2 hours and 7 minutes, if you're investigating a breach that happened 3 weeks ago, how are you going to do that? Right? And so we provide those types of capabilities. And we're really excited. So we're just launching out in India. Obviously, the market timing couldn't be better. A lot of you are thinking about sort of your cloud architectures, and I think it's foundational that you think about, with a fresh perspective, how are you going to solve security challenges in public cloud as well. So that's all I had. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
The question is that you started with the problem statement that in the world there will be some checkbox. Some checkbox might be missing.
Yep.
And there also might be the accessibility without protocol. So how is solving this issue?
So the way we solve it is, because you're not relying on proxies or agents, even if a developer comes into work in the morning, spins up a brand new instance, because we're connecting through the APIs and we're continuously discovering your resources and resource changes, we will immediately detect that some new instance has come up. Then we'll look at the configuration. How has the developer configured it, right? So we'll look at the network aspect, the configuration, your developer permissions, what are they doing? And we'll see how does that place against 2 things. One is policies that you've asked us to monitor for, and the other is more machine learning oriented patterns. So is this machine behaving erroneously for your environment that we've typically seen? So maybe that's an unauthorized use of that system itself. Or if that developer leaves that box open to the internet, because we're continuously analyzing all of these different elements of data, right? I mentioned network traffic, configuration, user activity. We're pulling all of that together to tell you that collectively we see there's a problem. Here's what the problem is, and explicit recommendations of how do you fix that problem, down to the command line that you need to execute in the cloud to go remediate.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
All right,
Great.
thank you. I will request to stay back on the stage, requesting Mr. Tausir Beg, Senior Sales Manager, Explorer Exhibitions and Conference, to kindly come on stage and present a certificate as token of appreciation. Thank you.